I am the developer and creator of Infinite Painter. So my name is Sean Brakefield. And so we have Andrew Theophilopoulos here, incredible artist. I love working with him any chance I can. And he's going to be just demoing some really amazing things that he does and can use with the program. So I'll leave it off to you. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thanks for being here, Sean. And like he said, he is the creator of this app. We'll be showing up today. If you missed it earlier this week, we went ahead and did a more fantastical concept art style demo. But today we're taking a huge step back. We're going to play with some of the stuff that anyone at this workshop is probably more familiar with the oil paint, the brushes, all the feeling of Alla Prima and things you love about painting a figure, except we're doing it on an iPad this time. So I'm going to kind of show you a little bit of my process of how that works. As you said, my name is Andrew Theophilopoulos. I am I would say half and half painter. I spent a lot of time learning oil, but even before that, I was doing Photoshop in middle school and high school. And then as iPad came out, I really got into trying to do a little bit more mobile stuff. It became the dream to bring your tablet with you to a figure session, because before that, we had giant PC towers and huge Cintiqs and stuff. So we're kind of at the threshold of a new generation of studies. I'll call it studies because we're going to be using Infinite Painter to do essentially doodles that you would want to bring home from to the studio and do a larger piece. So if I were to advise any painter who is looking to do some sketching at a figure session, they don't want to get toxic chemicals in the room. They don't want to poison their neighbors. They don't want to make a huge mess. And it takes 20 extra minutes to clean up after the show. This is going to be a great alternative, but it is not here necessarily to replace your final piece. We still want you to take oil brush, canvas, and make your masterpiece. So if you're the type of artist who is doing a studio painting, you're taking photography, you're getting all the information you can. Maybe you're doing a little oil study. So this is exactly what you would use Infinite Painter for. You want to bring it here to your session and jot down all the notes, the color notes, the transitions, the dark and the lightest points, because your photography might not be capturing that depending on the exposure. So Infinite Painter is definitely your next best tool for going out and doing some sketching. So what's playing right now in the video, hopefully everybody can see, and write in the comments if you cannot see the video playing. This is me taking a maybe 3-hour session at Society of Illustrators, and there's a few figure models that are hopping in and out. But you'll notice I'm painting and mixing directly with the previous sketch. And essentially what's happening is I'm kind of duplicating the layer. And what that does is it allows me to use new brush strokes that are kind of mixing in with the old colors and the old strokes. Now, that's really useful because you kind of get a head start on some of the colors, the transitions, and it really feels a lot better when you have a lot of color on your canvas and you start to maneuver and mix some of that color around versus a blank canvas and you have nothing on it. So I'm going to show you a few techniques to doodle. I'm going to show you a few of the cool tools we have. And eventually what I'm going to do is back away from the digital side. I'm going to get rid of all the tools and just paint with brush. And the brushes that I'll be using today aren't actually built into the app. These are things that I kind of went off on my own to create the look and feel of my not my childhood, but my college days where I was following Richard Schmidt. But essentially all the things that I loved about my rosemary brushes, the mongoose hair, the hog hair, these are things that I tried to build into the Alla Prima brush pack, which I'll put up on the screen. And essentially, like I said, it's 13 paint brushes that are going to imitate the best of Alla Prima, your mongoose hair, your hogs. So first things first, I'm just going to leave this aside while people come in. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to write it in the chat. We're going to stop, take breaks, any chance we can to start answering some questions. So feel free to steer this conversation any way you want. But I'm actually going to start and go over just the basics of the interface. I could probably show you what it's like to make a new document. This may be your first experience where you're coming into Infinite Painter, and this is where you're going to build your canvas. And you can go ahead, if you're more of an inch kind of person where you really like working at 18 by 24, go ahead and set your inches to be 18 by 24. You can change the video recording for your playback. That's going to be great for your YouTube channel, stuff like that. So this is the basic thing. You want to hit create. I'm going to go ahead and back out of this and go back into my piece. So as a blank canvas, I'm just going to go ahead and show you a little bit of what this looks and feels like without really having anything going on. Now, the paintbrushes that I built have up to 4K textures in it. And if I could zoom in to show you what that looks like, I'm talking about all the threads of canvas that you would find on an 18 by 24 or more. And that's due to extremely high resolution textures that I put in there. Now, mixability is probably the coolest thing you're going to find. Being able to scumble in a little bit of tone and just blend it and see how that works. Let's get some more brighter colors. But I'm using a top of the line iPad Pro. You can do the same with your phone. You can do the same with Android tablets and Android phones. So it really is up to you as to how you want to paint. Like I was saying a second ago, the feeling is what I pushed to get in my Alla Prima set, so that it feels like we're doing just like in oil painting. So if you missed it at the beginning, the process that I really like to use is to cover the canvas with color. Get rid of that white. It's really intimidating to have a white canvas rolling. But what's so beautiful about some of these Painterly brushes that are either built into the app or this brush pack here is when you have a canvas that's got a little bit of color on it, it's the same as if you just did an oil rub on your piece before you get painted, start painting. And what that's going to do is give you the ability to blend between the new color that you're picking and the colors that were on the canvas. So I did a lot of work in a figure session. I've done maybe 3 or 4 doodles, and I'm starting to slowly get a few of the nuanced skin tones, shadows, and highlights. And they're all going to start to mix into the next piece. So if I'm doing 3 or 4 studies, you're going to have all that base as a foundation to start your next doodle. A few layer modes I wanted to show you guys, because when you're going into a sketch, if you wanted to do figure, let me turn on my screencast here. There's a few different layer modes, and you're going to see that right here. A solo, a trace, and so what this is really useful for these layer modes, if you need to, is to do any sort of, when you hit a new layer, you're creating new content, you're going to essentially create like an onion skin or a piece of tracing paper on top of your layer, and it'll give you the ability to go forward. Let's see what kind of things we might want to be interested in here. If you go into your color, and just an interface thing, if you want to drag with 2 fingers and drop, you can have your color wheel anywhere on the canvas, which is great. And there's something really special that it's so hard to point out unless you're paying really close attention here. You can switch the hue of your color wheel right here. And you'll notice if you were to pick, I'm just going to leave the dot in the same section. Here's a blue. It's such a dark color. When you go around the color wheel, you're actually you hit yellow. It's such a brighter value. One thing that's really fantastic about painting digitally in this app is hitting the little sundial icon. And maybe you could see when I tap that, watch what happens when I go around the ring. The value of my color is going to transition. So you notice how it's jumping around. So I can pick a blue now, say right here. It's nice and dark. What happens when I go to the yellow? You can see how it transitions to the same exact value. And that's a value lock or a color lock. Really, really useful, so that you're not jumping around between high and low key. So if you want really high key painting, you can just look at this. I can go around the color wheel and get all these really soft muted colors, and the value is going to stay the same. This is so good because There was a demo the first day about high key painting. This is how you could achieve something like that. Or same if you wanted to do low key. So let's jump into what I would call the figure painter's mode. And I'm just going to do a quick doodle and see how that goes. One thing I want to do is get rid of my reference. And a really cool feature that you might want to have is the Navigator. All of our tools right here are at the bottom, at the top right. And I'm going to show you what the Navigator does. But before I do that, I actually want to dock the Navigator. There's a few tools that I might want on my dock at all times, so I can customize the toolbar. Let's go ahead and just drag that up here, the top. Oops. There we go. So I have my first tool in the toolbar. And what that's going to do is give me a secondary view of my drawing and painting. Now, this is, of course, really useful. It's the same as John Singer Sargent stepping 20 feet away from his canvas to kind of get a really stretched back view. This is exactly what that is. So we can check proportions at a small scale right next to our canvas. But not only that, you can double tap it so that you're getting the reverse view. This is awesome because it's the same as putting a little mirror in the side. If you go into your little setting icon here, you're also going to be able to check it out in black and white. So now I have the most awkward, disturbing view of my painting that I could get to get a fresh look at it. It's flipped, it's small, it's black and white. This is a great way to check your values, check your proportions. And again, you can find your Navigator tool up in the toolbar, which is these two icons here. And anything that you want to dock, let's say we want a 3-point perspective grid, go ahead and drag that up to the top. That's your thing. If I want to delete the layer, and that's a really functional button that I use all the time, go ahead and drag it up there. So there's a few tools you could just put in if they're your favorites. It's awesome, honestly. So I'm going to get rid of the clutter, and I'm going to jump into my first figure painting sketch. Go, let's see, normal mode. Okay, so a great example of how you can see the reverse in black and white. You'll notice that the painting that I did at the Society of Illustrators is really, really dark tones, which may not have been exactly what I wanted when I was painting the figure. So bringing this up and getting a view of your black and white is really going to help showcase the true value. So I have a few figure paintings, photos that I took. I'm just going to go in and try to show off some of these brushes that are built to be just like the Alla Prima style that Richard Schmidt would use, Jeremy Lipking, all these guys. And I was extremely inspired from them growing up, going to college. And they got me into rosemary brushes, which are some of the finest. And as you know, they're presenting here and they're helping out with the event as well. So I'm going to just do some sketching. Sean, if there's more questions that you want to call out, please feel free to.
There's actually, I can point out a few. We're actually kind of like, it's the chats. I love it how the chat is kind of exploding here in the background too.
That's cool.
So a few questions I can just point out real quick. So this is Infinite Painter. It is for Android, iOS, Chromebook, and also M1 Max. So there's some questions here about the perceptual brightness and or how the tone lock kind of works. So I'm going to try to keep this as general as possible to not get like too technical. Basically there's, when you're looking at RGB space or even like hue saturation and lightness models, some of these models were created like around the 1960s, and they're pretty flawed in the way that they handle the hue. And because the hue, even if you look at the color wheel and you were to change it, for example, to grayscale, which I think Andrew might show in a little bit, but you'll see that the hue will actually, the hue color ring, that not all those hue values look as bright as others. So you can see on here the color wheel, there's darker areas, there's lighter areas. And so what our technology does is it basically it changes two variables. It changes the saturation and the brightness at the same time to kind of compensate and maintain that tonal value or that perceptual brightness, if that helps at all. Yep. So it's just based on kind of some of the current things in the in color science right now, and some of the more current color models.
Yeah, and if you really want to test your skills and knowledge of the color wheel, I know it may be different between a traditional style and the one we have in this app here, but I can essentially color in black and white without knowing what color I'm picking. I mean, I can try to estimate. And that's all through our color mode that we just showed a second ago. And that's right here in your layer dropdown, which is that button and then that button. So I'm going to go back to standard and see what those last few strokes I did. Obviously, they're purple, they're blue. It's more of like, can you test your value and your knowledge of it? And then also, can you test and understand where exactly a color is? So it's a really hard training mechanism that I haven't really used in practice, but could be really cool. So yeah, one of the things I really like to do, as I mentioned at the early moments of the talk, is to do some sketches and try to, even if it's like 5 minutes, you just want to spit out as much color as you can to try and match what you see in real life. And if they're going to move in 5 minutes, that's fine, because you can duplicate that layer and start painting on top of that. Even though the pose is totally changed, you can start to pick from those colors. And if I could give you a quick showcase of how to pick a color, you can, the dot here is your color wheel. Show that. And if you were to drag out from it, you can pick anything on the map. So one more time, finger or pencil, you can drag in, and I can pick any of the colors that I either put down or that are optically mixing on the canvas. For me, just like a normal oil painter, we're kind of mixing over and over. We end up with a billion different, subtle color choices. So I won't be doing too much color grabbing, but it's a great way to do your gesture, get some, scribble out some doodles, color, light, value, and then move on to the next pose. So I'm actually going to do a quick sketch here. Maybe I'll go to some of the other brushes. My brush pack that I put together is based in 2 sets of hairstyle. We're gonna have a hog hair and then the mongoose hair. And I actually was one of the earlier Rosemary customers who still got mongoose hair before that disappeared. So what I'm trying to do in this brush pack is kind of simulate those things that I love from Richard Schmidt, from Rosemary and Co., and get that into an app. So this should feel relatively similar to what you're used to. Okay, let's get some of this going. There's more of a sharp edge to this model here. And this brush is so cool because you have a sharp, and if I could zoom in, you have the sharp mixed with the fade into a canvas. So I can actually really, really chisel out a super bright highlight and the back of her shoulders here. Right now, it's probably still a blob. You guys don't know what I'm drawing yet. Let's try and speed up a little bit to get some of these color choices into place. And so everything's mixing live under my pressure. And depending on if I'm stabbing the canvas, let's do a bigger demo here. If I'm stabbing the canvas, it's going to be very different than if I tilt the pencil and I kind of glide across it, because you're going to get more of that texture that you would as if you're hitting the base of your brushes here. And so you'll kind of scrape more. So if you get a hold of the brush pack or any of the brushes in here, make sure you're doing multiple different passes at pressure and angle, just to see what exactly each angle does for each brush. So I'll go ahead and do some very more like bristly, and this is going to look a lot more like hog hair with some heavy paint on it. So let's go ahead, start to chisel out some of these details here. Yeah, look at that. I mean, if you can see the difference between if I were to drag straight and then if I were to tilt that brush, and look at that kind of just dragging of the base, whether it's a hog or a mongoose, just the base of it kind of stumbles across and you get that really nice, interesting textures. Some of those textures you could see in some of the demos this week with the oil painters. So it's really cool. So I'm going to do a quick study here, and then I'm going to move into more of a longer pose, but this is going to be really good because I want to make sure I catch some of the color tones that are passing in and out of this mostly reflective light in flesh here. It does get a little darker along the ridge. Let's get that in there. It looks more like a bluish, believe it or not. It's so neutral, but that core shadow, which is mixing in with a little bit of the ribs there, goes down here. And I can kind of just scumble that in and give us the sense of like the blue that you might see in the shadow side of a figure. But because I put in some of those more bounce lights, we're getting bounce from some of the ground space. I wish I could show you the model, but for her privacy, I'm not gonna post that. But there's all this beautiful bounce light that I can almost scumble in to get some of the glow. And it's all about that delicate pressure that you would put the same amount of effort into with an oil. And you just kind of want to very, very slightly glaze it, because that's how you get these really intricate differences. With one brush, you can get so much variety. And I think that's partially because the pencil and the tilt, it's just phenomenal what you can put into it. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some chiseling. We don't always work on the background. And I'm going to start to chisel out some of these negative spaces to see if it feels a little bit more human-like and less blob-like. Here, I'd love to essentially like make a funky colored mess and then chisel it out with the background, because that's how you start to get those transitions start to make sense, the way the belly of the torso starts to glow based on the bounce light. So being able to show and draw the foreground and then the background and chisel and push and pull. Okay, that's that. A couple of tools you might want to know. Your finger up and down is going to give you brush size. So let's go full. That's what that looks like. And then down, of course, is smaller brushes. If you use the side, you can get more of like very texture, quick pass. Here, let's get some yellowy.
So there was a question about how it blends. Max had a question of, does the color blend with the active layer or everything? You can actually do both, which is really cool. So when you have blend active, there's a little settings gear instead of the color button there on the toolbar. And if you click on that, you can choose to sample lower layers or not. Or you can also build it directly into the brush to where in the brush settings, it'll say sample layer lowers in the paint settings. And if that's the case, then you can pull from different layers to do basically like global blending, which is kind of cool. Or you can work directly on just a single layer by turning that off.
Cool.
This looks awesome, Andrew. I love this.
I mean, it's so funny because
back too. It looks great.
Yeah, I mean, every artist has this moment where it's like, oh, geez, I'm struggling to get the ins and outs. But I mean, we've only been here a few minutes, so it's not that big a deal. Everybody knows the ugly portion of a painting. And what I really like about doing the gestures in the same file as the final piece that you might go home with at the end of the night is to have that history. And when you play back a video for your YouTube or your Instagram, you're going to have all your sketches lined up. And for anyone who maybe missed it, I'm just going to play this again so you can see what that's like. A typical day at Society of Illustrators, where you have multiple models that are posing. It's starting out with the first early poses that are maybe 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and you're getting a sense of history every time you do a new layer on top. And you're kind of picking and pulling from those colors that you just splashed out. And I'm telling you, it happens at light speed. So it's really kind of I don't know, it's a dance almost. But having that history is really great because you're starting to build up, not the first time, not the second, but maybe the third or fourth, you're starting to hit a little bit of the rim light or the bounce light or some of the deep colors and the cracks of the skin fold. So the more you go to town, doing your gestures within the same file as your final piece, the more nuanced color you're going to have from that history. And for anyone who's painted on top of an old painting they didn't like, they turn it upside down, they scrape it. You're going to have a canvas. It's full of texture, it's life, it's all the work that you maybe put into it. It's got your personality. And that's the same effect here. So we want to have a little bit of a historical feel to the textures in the background or in the foreground, something that showed up until the very end. So you can see how just smudging and blurring and changing the pose within the same wet canvas is going to give you kind of a high speed effect where you can actually start to pick the colors from the last guy, put it in a new place, change the lighting, and just move forward. And so it's kind of the same that you would hopefully do in oil. You've got all your mixtures that you did over the last hour, and you can just kind of pick and pull from those. And I think what Infinite Painter does really well is it gets the interface out of the way, and you can just focus on painting. Because a lot of times there's distractions with your materials. They're dirty, you dropped them, you spilled on your backpack. There's just so much going on. Some days you just need to relax, you know, get yourself a coffee, go draw, and don't worry about the cleanup after, just shove it in your backpack. The worst case scenario is your battery's gonna die and then you have to go home. But you can see how just building this up over and over and over gives you a lot of history in the strokes and so many different versions of flesh tone in different versions of light. And I think Richard Schmidt had said it in a video I watched when I was in college is you kind of look, you make a mistake, you kind of judge it, you look again, you make another mistake, and you're almost like trying and failing until you hit the right point. And don't be afraid to swipe at a color. And if it's wrong, it's probably because you're recognizing that the relationship between the colors next to it just aren't working out or aren't the same. And of course, with digital art, we have no limit on our supplies, so we can paint all day without having to waste. So that's a basic 2-3 hour session. And as you saw, it kind of starts with this very, very simple and very rough sketching phase. So there are a few other tools in this brush pack that aren't just the oil paint. Everybody loves having a fan brush, and this one is actually not a smudge tool, which smudge is totally different. You can smudge your color by using the smudge tool. You can change it to your eraser and totally cut out of it. But I actually built in a fan blender, which is something similar to that, you know, something where you can tickle the canvas and just kind of barely smudge things around. In the case where you need a really soft transition. And you can use that and just kind of like fade the two. This is going to feel just like tickling the canvas. And you can see how I can let the form turn really, really nicely there and almost like disappear, like the lost edge. And so there's so much texture in this leg here. I want to soften it. And I'm not even using the smudge tool. Like I said, I'm using a fan brush, which is built in to be more smudgy and not necessarily it's not going to lay down any paint. And look at that. So now all these crazy strokes that I threw in where I'm like, nope, that's the wrong color. That's the wrong color. I can start to blend those together really nicely. And we start to get a little bit of glow. There we go. So one thing I really like to do is I'll make a swipe of color that's wrong. And that's kind of what that is. It's too bright, way too bright. I wanted a bounce light from the belly. But I can pick the in-between. Like I can go straight to this color, which is the in-between. It's not the pure, it's not the old, it's kind of where they blended. And that's the color I wanted. So let me start over. I'm just gonna hit undo. And then since I picked the color, now I can sketch with that and we'll get a really nice in-between. And we're gonna start to see some of the fade of that underbelly bounce light. Nice. Go ahead and swing out some more questions. I see there's quite a bit of activity.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it's good. I love this. This is awesome. So yes, the question is there a lasso tool where I can select areas like in Photoshop? And
yeah. Oh yeah.
So there's basically, we're good.
If I can just show real quick in case anyone's new coming in, our tools are going to be at the top. You can see me kind of poking around at those. We're going to have our more of mark making tools such as perspective grids, symmetry, if you want lazy tool, paint bucket, that's all on this left side here. And then the right toolbar is going to have more of your Photoshop editing style stuff. So like you were looking for, the lasso is going to be the first thing. And as I mentioned earlier, if you hold down on any tool you want to have at your main toolbar, just dock it at the top. And you can fill this with pretty much any tool you want. So I want to use the lasso tool to create a really, really sharp edge because let's see, in here, the transition between the leg and I guess the shadow side of the crotch, it's such a sharp transition that maybe I can't pull it off with a brush. So you can use the lasso tool, and this section is now active. And then this section is not active. And let me just show you what that looks like. I'm going to hit OK on my tool there. And anywhere I paint inside the selection, it's going to be masked. So let's go ahead and just put in a little bit of that shadow I was trying to create here. And you can be like really gestural about it too, and not have to worry about that sharp edge. And look at that. So that's exactly what you'd probably want to use it for, is just masking off a section. You get that really sharp transition, but I left it open to the flick of a brush stroke. And that's honestly, when I'm dealing with hair, pubic hair, anything like that, I usually try to create some sort of transitions that are sharp, whether it's a flesh interacting with something that's really like a swipe. And maybe that's something you would see a painter do in their own time. And if it's wrong, you don't have to scrape it down, you just hit undo. But yeah, is there something else maybe they wanted to know about the lasso?
Yeah, I was going to add also with the lasso, we do also have lasso brushes too, which can be useful for building up a scene and such. We kind of went over with our last demo with that, but yeah, so if you look at the brushes, you'll find what are called fill brushes, and yeah, they're basically just they lay down textures in a very yeah, you can lay down areas, just swaths of areas pretty quickly. So.
And yeah, he's talking about fill brushes, which you'll find here in your brush. You could slide down, get your fill, and just a quick demo of what that looks like if you want a solid shape, like I'm talking graphic. And people will turn down the opacity of it and create more of like, I don't know, it's kind of like watercolor in a way where you might want to just block in certain shapes, let them overlap. So very easy way to either draw a full shape, or you could even use it as an eraser with the fill tool and just chisel out, just totally erase something. And that's also really useful. If I wanted to cut out this person because I want to do a custom background, you could see how I would do that. Now, look, there's nothing behind her. So really useful, especially if you want to use a new layer for the background. So you can chisel out any way you want. I'm going to do a little bit more work on this piece. And I'm going to hit some real highlights one more time at the back of the shoulder here, because this is on fire. And just to show you what this brush looks like, it's got a nice fade into a canvas stroke. So I'm not going to go pure white, but just swipe at it. And you can see how that back is transitioning so smoothly. And then you hit a really sharp edge, which kind of cuts you into the background. And maybe I'll just subtly put in some features for the eyes, nose, and mouth. So yeah, from afar, it might look like a random doodle. And at this point, the model has definitely moved. They're like, okay, next. So I'm going to do the same thing. Let's move into the next piece, which is a very similar pose. So like before, I can kind of use this exact layer. I'll duplicate it. And maybe I want to morph it. So some of the colors are there. There's some transitions on the back because she's still in a very similar pose. But I'm going to liquefy some of the color to be in the right position. You'll find that right here. I'm just going to dock that, liquefy. And let's go ahead and just move up some of this because it's like more of that. So like I said, I've got all the color nuance, the textures, and I'm ready to start painting wet into wet as if there was a doodle I made, and I'm ready to keep going. Maybe one more time with this back because there's a real hunch. And you can almost use your old color to doodle the next pose and do like a gesture. So I'm actually going to see how I can morph some of the color and anatomy to fit the next pose. Okay, say that's good. And there's such a huge arch in her back right now. You'll see in a second how that's going to work out. So I'm going to go directly in. I'm on a brand new layer using the Alla Prima brushes. I'm going to start to chisel this out, see how it works. Just kind of scumble that. A little bit more of a soft transition there. And put in some of the shoulder anatomy.
Nice. I love that lighting. It's awesome.
Yeah, this is actually a photo shoot I did with some of my heroes, James Martin, George Pratt, Dominic Avant, Jason Bennett. We all went out to, this is in Sarasota, Florida. We went out to a friend, Larry Forgard's house. He has a lot of property. And of course, there's just a bunch of us taking photos of model, which I'm sure is spooky if anyone saw that who's walking by. But it's these moments where you get to be with your heroes for a minute. And it's like, I haven't really done much sketching with this photo shoot, but it is one of my favorite memories. So I'm really happy to kind of share this for the first time and get to doodle with it. Is my screen brightness? Okay. All right, so I'm just going to keep pushing. I need to quickly start to chisel out the next bit of anatomy and the pose by using a lot of the same old colors, but just pushing and pulling the shapes a little bit more. Maybe I'll do something a little bit more, more textured. I really love it when I go into a figure painting and I'm just like sketching so fast. There's a lot of that texture built in to each stroke. And my Alla Prima brushes are hog hair and mongoose. So a lot of the ones at the top are going to feel soft. The one at the very bottom is super like juicy. So I'm going to mess with that a little bit. It's going to feel like a thick paint. We're going to see
how often do you switch? We have a question over here, Andrew. How often do you typically switch brushes during a session?
Believe it or not, it could depend on first of all, which brush you like. Because sometimes I will stick with the brush the entire time. But there are things that certain brushes do differently. Like a minute ago, I pull out this very, very textured brush. So if that's the kind of look you want, I feel like you would stick with it for 60, 70% of the time because it's going to have that really, really juicy feel. But sometimes I'll even pull out a very mechanical round brush that feels like Photoshop because I want to do some airbrushing and I want to soften some transitions or something like that. So I would say stick with a single style of brush, and every brush in here has got a very, very unique style to it. Let's go with the radioactive one just to show you what that would look like. Extremely like wild textures that you can get from a single piece. So I would say stick with a kind of a genre of a brush, go to town, and then clean it up with something that you feel like is a more of a polished brush. And then, it's a dance, you go back and forth. And so like I mentioned earlier, I have this Navigator, which is showing me my piece. This is the full color version. I turned it into black and white. I flipped it because I want to be able to see like an outside view. If my teacher came up and tapped me on the shoulder, he'd say, the value is wrong. And this kind of gives me that sense of somebody's watching me and sees it through the lens of another artist or somebody with an outside view. So very helpful to have your Navigator rolling. And one thing, of course, everybody loves to share their painting when they're done, whether you're walking around in between a break, you make new friends. This is perfect for doing your sketches for social media because you can go into the record menu, which is at the top right, record and share your process so far. So if you look, I've got strokes drawn, 825 strokes. I've gone 151 feet worth of length of stroke and 32 minutes. I can put this on Instagram and in no time. So it's really, really helpful for people who maybe want to study under you, but you didn't have a camera at your figure painting session. So you can't exactly show off the details of your process. I'm going to transform and move this up a little bit. I want more of a, I want to get her feet in there too. So let's go ahead and add the basic transform up here because I use that all the time. And I'm just gonna move it up just so I have a little more room. One thing that I really like about my fan brush I showed you guys a second ago is the fan blender. Like I said, you can very gently, softly blend transitions, right? Or if you stab the canvas, you're gonna pull that pigment. So in this case, I moved the canvas up, but now I have, look at this huge gap. I want to fill that, so I'm just going to use this fan brush and pull those colors. Very quick way to fill that space. Okay, now we're back to where we need to be. And you can see the figure starting to come together. I have an old Society of Illustrators painting in the background. I've got the sketch from earlier in this demo. And I'm still just kind of pushing and pulling and chiseling at this point. I'm carving the positive and negative shapes. And I think that's what's going to give you a very painterly feel, is if you kind of go through the painter's process, you know, the push and the pull, the sculpting, get it wrong, try again kind of thing, you know?
We had one question. I love this, by the way, Andrew, how organic you're working here. We had one question. She asked, how many hours did you need to spend with this interface before you felt comfortable with it?
Real quick, I'm just gonna 4 fingers down. There we go. It doesn't matter anymore. Like, look at this interface. I've got the color wheel and my favorite brush. 3 fingers up and down is gonna give me my brush size. This is the same as having, you know, all your brushes on the side. Unlimited color, but no mess. There's no interface anymore. And if you look at 3D programs, 2D software, it's insane. So for me, I mean, I've been doing digital work almost my entire art career. It's easy to jump in and out, but I think what you find with this app is it's out of the way. At least what I'm showing you today, because last week I was going all over the place with crazy tools and stuff. This is just pick a brush, and I'll get rid of this for a second so I can show again. If you tap on your color wheel, 2 fingers, bring that into the space. 4-finger tap is going to get rid of the canvas. I mean, you're stuck now. This is you in the wild without any interface. And as long as you remember, up and down is going to be your brush size. And there is a back button at the bottom left, or 2 fingers is your undo. 3 fingers is your redo. I don't think it takes you any time, 5-10 minutes. Okay. Like if you want to just jump in and go full screen mode, you're going to feel like an oil painter. And that's not for, you know, everybody. A lot of people just love all the gizmos and gadgets, but for the audience today, I have a feeling most of us don't care or know anything about the details of interface. And so that's why I'm very happy to just, you know, get it out of the way. And I'll try to do that for the rest of the demo here. So you can see I'm putting in darker colors, and because it's wet into the wet, it's mixing. The lighter I press, the less of a flow of that brush. And Susan had a great example of it today where she was just barely pushing and you get a certain look, versus if you stab, you get a different look. And if you tilt on the side, look at all that texture you're gonna get in there. So essentially what I'm doing is I've got the foundation of color, the gradients between these glows and the bounce light, and I can stab, if I want to darken an area, and just kind of scribble it, just blend it in. It's exactly like oil. And now look at the texture I built just there. That's something you might look at when you get close to somebody's piece and you're like, oh my God, look at the juice. And I just did it the same way you might have done it with a real brush. Okay, I'm gonna start to hit some new colors because I see some really hot reds in some of the crevices of the skin on skin. And then it just glows some more neutral colors. I think the best ability to get, you know, like a sort of sense of realism with color is to have almost like neutral, maybe even everywhere. If that's the kind of painter you are, you can be really neutral. And what makes it feel real is when you hit it with some crazy color. So let's go into the brightest orange section that I see. And I would say right around her ear is going to be some super hot saturated color. So from afar, look at this, that pops. That's insane how just a touch makes the whole painting feel like it's got all the color in the world. But really, it doesn't. It's just like a lot of mud in the right place. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my interface back up just so everybody remembers what it looks like. I want to grab the color of this breast here, or maybe even the background, because I want to start doing more chiseling. I'm just going to erase that. Actually, I got to erase a lot of this here. This is not part of her pose. Say right about there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and mix that. It's like a very neutral bounce color. So, and I think a lot of people, if you're doing figure drawing, it's one thing. When you have no time, there's really not much space to do a drawing. And a lot of us may be comfortable with that. Like we just want to jump in and chisel away and start to block out what we see. So this demo is probably going to jive with you if you don't use line or anything, because I didn't. I just used blocks. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm going back and forth. I'm chiseling. I'm looking at the negative space, the positive space, and I'm trying to let those transitions tell the story. And from afar, it feels okay. It feels okay. It's not perfect, but you know. So let's go ahead and get some more bounce light, because I know this arm is going to glow. It's got a lot of that flesh from right here. This leg is almost like a light source. And if anyone else has more questions, please feel free to hop on in. But you can almost use, when you're dealing with bounce light, you can use the figure, which is a flesh tone. It's like a very orangey color. That highlight is going to bounce up into the chest, into the arms. And that's why you're going to get all these interesting nuanced colors of the oranges that transition into the blues, because essentially this flesh tone on her leg is bouncing up and hitting everything it sees. So let me do something similar, because in her jaw, there's like a really nice bounce light too. So I'll start to scumble that in there. Let's see what happens. And this is a little too saturated at some points, but you can see how going back and forth, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, while you're changing your drawing and the shapes, I think it's what adds up to a really nice sketch. And everybody's been to the museum where we looked at painting and we saw, you know, masterpiece, but when you show up in person, you realize there's so much mistake that you can see through the painting. Under it, you can see all of the failed attempts, and it helps to bring a little bit more of a naturalism to the masters or somebody who you thought was God, because they too were making the wrong move, and that's part of it. Make the wrong move, try to fix it, adjust it, and see how it goes. So again, Infinite Painter for iPad, for Android, for your phone, for your M1 Mac. You're gonna have a really fantastic experience, but as I said at the beginning of this lecture, it's not necessarily about replacing your oil painting supplies or materials or your favorite, you know, traditional brushes. This is for maybe just the lazy days where you don't want to carry all your stuff across town to get to a figure session. You want to capture some of the realism that you find in the color and the nuance, but you know, you want to use it as a support or like a crutch to your photography, because the photography that you take back to the studio is not going to be an authentic representation of the color and the light. So it's really good to have a little bit of both. You want to be able to be brutal with your judgment in this phase. Let's get a hot highlight. This is like the brightest point. I love using the hog hair at a highlight because it's got all that juice in it. So let's get it to feel like it's super thick. And then we get some more transitional colors here, which will turn into some really saturated browns that are almost like hot red as they come around the corner and pick up some of that bounce light. So look, like 4 or 5 different strokes when they're combined, and you just do a subtle transition on each stroke, you're going to get a very realistic feel that you would find in an oil painting. And so let's just kind of scribble. You want it to feel like you're, you know, super speed as fast as you can. The model's about to move. The model's breathing. There's bugs in the air. The light is changing. It's just a wild ride. And so it's kind of what I want to make sure everybody feels when they're out painting. Just keep yourself on your toes and try to emulate the same moves that you do when you're traditionally painting. Let's see.
We have so much really positive feedback all throughout this chat while you've been painting, and
That's great.
so yeah, I mean, I just want to also second that is like, you know, a few people had also chimed in to the perspective demo, and so then they're coming into this one, and it's a whole different way you're approaching the program. But I mean, I have to second that this is just insane what you're doing right now. So yeah, thanks guys for all the questions here and all the positive feedback. I think there was one question I was going to hit if possible.
And do give me a 5-minute heads up, and I'll try to show one last, like if somebody wants to create their own brush, I'll show you how to do that. That's really
cool.
powerful.
Do you want to quickly show the canvas texture by any chance? I don't know if we went
over.
Oh,
yes. That's a great idea.
This is one way. You mentioned texturing. This might be really good for people who are just interested in kind of exploring a bit.
Okay. So as you see, I'm dealing with textures, but they're built into the brush, and I'll even show you what it would look like if I used a gesso brush. And this has texture built into it. Let's go back to an old layer. This has texture built into it, almost like it's, let me clear this. It's got the gesso board in the background. Look at that. And this is, it's like simulating it, but it is built directly into the brush. So anytime I kind of scumble on top, look at that. That's going to feel just like this panel here, which has
another person asked what scumble meant, by the way.
Scumbling is kind of like where you have a color. Let's say I have this red, but I want to change it, alter it some way without going full green. So let's say I want this green, and I want the in-between, like an optical illusion of the gray that would come out of a green and a red mixing. A scumbling is where you just gently touch it. And you look at that. It's a very neutral gray. Let's see what kind of gray it is. That's kind of what scumbling is. If you've gone too far, you want to just barely like shift the color to be something else, you can scumble it in, which is just like a dry brush, very, very subtle transition. So what I just showed you was textures built into the brush. But what if we have, let's go back to this is a soft brush. What if we want to add texture to the background? Let me zoom in so you can see. I just added almost like an interactive canvas in the background. And so at this point, look, now I'm just barely gently gliding across, but the background now has like a 3D depth to it. And it's a canvas. And I can use any brush that feels like flat and real. It doesn't have canvas built into the brush. And you're going to get that. Now, some people might not like the opacity, so you could turn down the actual like visual cue that there's a texture there. And then you can change the scale, the depth, how much you want it to interact, because it really changes the game when you feel like you're painting on an actual canvas or gesso. If you import the brush pack, the Alla Prima brushes, you will get access to the high-res textures that you can use as your paper texture. And that's, again, for people who don't know, this is your layer stack. You can slide it out for some features. And then if you tap the paper, that's where you're going to find textures. I'm just going to go and paint while you ask that next question, because I do want to try and resolve this.
So there's more, specific questions about how does this compare to like other programs like Procreate. Every program has its own identity, has its own strengths and weaknesses. Infinite Painter focuses a lot on a well-organized, clean interface, and having enough flexibility to where you can kind of make it kind of tailor it toward your needs, but also having a whole lot of tool sets, but not just a whole lot of tool sets, but also trying to kind of rethink the way that we approach certain tools or bring new tools to market. Like we had showed in the demo a couple days ago, the hatching tool, for example. So, we're just trying to push the industry in the way that, we think, makes the most sense. And other programs are also trying to do that too. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy how much better of a life we have as an artist now, in terms of not the final piece, because I still make oil paintings, but the sketch, the planning phases, or just being lazy and bringing an iPad instead of your watercolor or oil set. There's a lot that we have at our hands right now that I did not have. And if you think about growing up as a young artist, how much money did your family have to spend on you to kind of nurture you, to get you brushes, to get you new paint? So for those of you who don't know, this iPad app is the cost of an overpriced Starbucks drink. If you can skip that for a day, get your caffeine some other way, you've got free tools for your iPad. Anything you need, it's all kind of built in for you. So it's just crazy because I was not a wealthy person, nor did my family have any money, and it was a rare birthday or Christmas to get my hands on some art supplies. So it took many years before I got my first set of oils. I was in my second year of college. I can't believe it took that long because, of course, I fell in love right away. But this is coming from our heart. This is me struggling as a poor person with no art supplies, and then not realizing I was an artist until late because we didn't have the luxury to experiment. So we're kind of bringing that to anybody at this point. And so I encourage you to, if you can, support us, to spend that Starbucks money here one day and just go ahead and post online and share some of the stuff you were able to do. You don't have to buy my brush pack, but you can use all the built-in tools to make a lot of really good work. And as you see here, I'm learning how to oil paint the way I'm painting right now. I'm doing exactly what I would do on a canvas behind me. So you're training. That's the thing. It's like when I say this is simulating or emulating my feeling of oil, that means I'm essentially in like a virtual reality mode where I'm literally in the game, doing all of the same mistakes or learning from past mistakes and trying again. I did it back there, and now I'm trying it again on a device, which is it's wild. I'm gonna do one last chisel because I really like to carve out with this mongoose.
But go for it.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, everybody.
Oh no, it's okay. We still have a good many people here, so hopefully we don't flood you guys too much into your next demo.
I'm gonna just chisel out the back of her head, and everybody loves just going to town. Like when you have a transition that you really want to nail, I'm just gonna quickly carve her out with this really sharp brush, and kind of just play with the background, just let it be artsy fartsy. And then, like I did earlier, I'm going to bring out the fan blender, and I'm just going to just fade some parts. Like, what does that look like when it kind of fades in to the background? It's almost like she's got a ghost edge there. Look at that. Is there another place where that happens? Definitely in the feet. This foot is more like lost in the shadow, and then this one kind of has a few like pieces of rubble. So you can see how you can, with a few brushes, get some amazing transitions in no time. For those who have made it this far, I've got a treat for you. I'm going to show you how to make a brush in about a minute, so that you can take any of the built-in brushes and then make your own. And kind of the way I did it, but I encourage you to, if you can't afford a brush pack, let's go to town and show you how to make one. I basically just make a black and white blob with textures. Imagine taking a brush, dipping it in ink, and then stabbing it on a piece of paper, and you get this super high res scan. Let's say that's what this blob is supposed to be. So I have let's go ahead and get rid of this for a second. I have a high res scan of a ink blob from a brush. Go into your selection tools, which is your lasso. And first thing I'm going to do is select all, which is on the left. It's just going to select the entire canvas. Now, if you notice, if you scroll over the very, very right, there is a plus brush button. Hit that. I'm going to hit it. It created a new brush in your custom folder, but this is the fastest way to create new tools for yourself. And it's basically making a head. So I'm going to go into, instead of my created, which is where it just made a brush, I'm going to find a brush. So go into your paint section. Let's say you want this, let's do flat oil. You can duplicate that brush. Test. We're gonna call it test. Okay. Here you can dock your brush editor. Let's get that out of the way. And now you're going to start to play with all the settings you have for brush making. The one I'm going to change is the head. I'm going to go into here, and it's in my brush head shape areas. So I basically cloned a brush and I changed its head to be custom. Now you can argue that that is a whole new brush. Let's see how it feels. Look at that. That is, let's change the spacing a little bit. This is my custom head on an old brush. It's got all the fluidity that you might want from the other brushes. It'll mix in real nice. But you can quickly create new textures, new heads, which is the stamp, and create your own brush. And it's kind of how I went through and created my Alla Prima brush pack. So that kind of that hits the end of our conversation here. I encourage everybody, if you can, support the app on the Android or the iOS marketplace. If you want to check out the link in the description of this demo, you'll find a link to my brush pack, which is just my heart and soul and my love for my early days, where I learned from Richard Schmidt how to create really nice brush stroke and stuff like that. So I'm trying to do the exact same thing, but on a digital program. We encourage you to give back to the community. If you create some brushes, share it with us. We want to see that. And if you have an iPad or an Android or even a cell phone, take it to your next figure class and show us what you ended up sketching.
Awesome.
Again, I am Andrew Theophilopoulos. This is Sean. If you want to say goodbye, maybe give them your website details so they know where to find you.
Yeah, so I just posted the website. It's going to be infinitestudio.art. You can also find us on Instagram at infinite.painter. Or you can also reach out over email at support or Sean at infinitestudio.art. And yeah, if you guys have any questions at all, like we love to listen and see your work, and also try to help with any feedback and things. So
cool.
Thank you guys for attending. It's Andrew. I love it. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really fun. And I encourage everybody who may be new to digital painting is just to get rid of the interface, pick your favorite brush, go to town with the color, and just kind of pretend like you're an oil painter. As you can see, I'm all types. You can find my work at Theonidas.com or AndrewTheo.com. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me as well. But I encourage you to take a little tablet out. Don't forget to bring an external battery and go paint.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, guys. All right.
Thank you. We'll see you around. Cheers.